Border control officers tortured me for 8 hours not knowing their government personally wanted me there. I arrived in the country exhausted, but excited to receive my humanitarian award the next day. The officer, a large man with a crew cut, looked from me to my passport, his expression growing hostile when he saw where I was from. He said something to me, but my grasp on the language here was limited, so I just shook my head. He snapped his fingers in my face and shouted, "You, terrorist?" When I shook my head, confused, he made an explosion gesture with his hands. "Boom boom? You want boom boom?" I tried to show him my invitation letter from his government, but he slapped it away without looking. "No, you problem. Big problem." He called another officer over, a woman who looked at me like I was diseased. They pulled me into a small room, speaking rapidly to each other in their language I couldn't follow. The woman said something long and complicated to me, and when I looked confused, she laughed. "Stupid. He's stupid too." She spoke again, very fast, then shook her head when I didn't respond. "Off. Clothes. Off." She started pulling at my jacket herself when I hesitated. The female officer dumped my bag while I was still trying to understand what was happening. She found my prayer beads and threw them against the wall, scattering them everywhere. She held up my medal from the UN and said something with many words I didn't know. When I reached for it, she threw it in the trash. "Fake. You understand fake?" She tore up my documents without reading them, including the invitation with the official government seal. The male officer said something that made them both laugh, but I only caught the word toilet and saw him make a flushing gesture. The male officer forced me to strip to my underwear, getting frustrated when I didn't understand his initial commands. "Are you deaf or just R-worded?" he said, though I only understood the angry tone. They left me standing nearly naked while they ate lunch in front of me. The woman pointed at my body and said a long sentence to her partner. When I didn't react, she said slowly, "You, ugly, starving, R.A.T." They both laughed at how she had to simplify for me. When I reached for my clothes because I was cold, the female officer grabbed my wrist and bent it backward until I cried out. She said something complex and angry, then simplified, "No, bad, you bad." She bent my wrist again. The male officer started pushing me against the wall, saying something after each push that sounded like a question. When I didn't answer, he pushed harder. "He doesn't even understand when we're interrogating him," the woman said to her partner. They brought in a drug dog, and the male officer gave me a long command I couldn't understand. When I stood there confused, he forced me onto all fours. "Dog position. You understand dog? Woof woof." The dog was aggressive, barking in my face while they had what sounded like a whole conversation about me. The woman kept saying suspicious, which was one word I knew, pointing at me and making the dog bark more. The woman found my phone and showed it to her partner, having a long discussion while pointing at my contacts written in my language's script. "Terrorist names," she said slowly to me. "All terrorist." She scrolled through my messages, shaking her head and saying things I didn't understand, occasionally showing the screen to her partner who would react with disgust. Then she looked at me and very slowly said, "You, go, prison, long, time," before smashing my phone against the table. They made me do jumping jacks, the male officer demonstrating first while saying something that made his partner laugh. When I was too slow, he sprayed me with cold water. "Faster, faster." When I collapsed from exhaustion, they stood over me having a conversation where I heard pathetic and weak, mixed with words I didn't know. The woman threw paper towels at me. "Clean, you dirty pig. Oink, oink." The male officer put on latex gloves and said a long sentence with medical-sounding words. When I looked confused, he just said, "Bend." He conducted an invasive body cavity search while saying things to his partner that made her laugh. I was crying from pain and humiliation, but couldn't understand their commentary, except when she said slowly, "Baby, don't cry, baby." They handcuffed me to a chair, and the male officer held a taser, speaking in a long, threatening tone. I recognized none of it except when he simplified, "Zap, zap. Understand? Electric." He pressed it against my neck without activating it. The woman said something about Guantanamo, and they both laughed. "No lawyers, no phone calls, no one will ever know," she said, though I only understood her threatening gestures of zipping her lips and drawing across her throat. The female officer took out scissors and started cutting my hair off in chunks. "Pretty now," she said sarcastically. She was in the middle of saying something long to her partner about booking procedures when her phone rang. She answered casually, speaking quickly, then suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Her face went completely white. "What do you mean, State Department? What do you mean, Peace Prize?" She looked at me, then at my destroyed belongings, then at her partner who was still holding the taser. The male officer grabbed the phone, and I watched his face transform from confusion to horror as someone apparently explained who I was in rapid English I couldn't follow, but I understood 2 words clearly: presidential and ceremony. His mouth opened and closed as he stared at me sitting there handcuffed, soaking wet, hair butchered, nearly naked. The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a crack, while both officers stood frozen, staring at each other with eyes wide. The woman started yelling something in their language, pointing at the trash can where she'd thrown my medal, then at me sitting there shaking from cold. The man grabbed the trash can and dumped everything onto the floor, dropping to his knees to paw through the wet paper towels and my torn documents. She rushed over to me with the handcuff keys, her hands shaking so bad she dropped them twice before managing to unlock the medal from my wrists. "Sorry, sorry," she kept saying while the man tried to piece together the ripped invitation letter like a puzzle on the dirty floor. Neither of them would look at me directly as they scrambled around the room, bumping into each other, the woman almost slipping on the water they'd sprayed me with earlier. The man found my smashed phone and held up the pieces, looking sick as he showed his partner the cracked screen and bent frame. She grabbed a plastic bag from a drawer and started shoving everything into it, the broken phone, the torn papers, even picking up my prayer beads one by one from where they'd scattered across the floor. The door burst open, and an older man in a fancier uniform walked in, stopping dead when he saw me sitting there nearly naked with chunks of my hair on the floor around the chair. He started shouting at both officers who tried to talk over each other, the woman pointing at the phone on the floor while the man held up the plastic bag of my destroyed things. The supervisor pulled out his own phone and made a call, speaking fast and angry. Then his voice changed to something worried and he kept saying, "Yes, sir," over and over. He hung up and grabbed some papers from a filing cabinet, shoving them at me along with a pen, pointing where to sign, while saying, "No problem, all fixed, you sign here." I couldn't read what the form said. My hands were shaking too much anyway, and when I didn't sign fast enough, he took my hand and tried to guide it to the signature line. Someone pushed a phone against my ear, and an American voice was talking fast about State Department and diplomatic incident and asking if I needed medical attention. "Okay," I managed to say when he asked if I was hurt. Then yes, when he asked if I could still attend tomorrow's ceremony, though I could barely focus on his words through the ringing in my ears. The voice kept asking questions, but I could only give one-word answers. My brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton, watching everything happen from far away. They finally brought me my things in the plastic bag, my phone in 5 or 6 pieces, the invitation letter torn into strips, my prayer beads loose and tangled, my UN medal scratched and dented from hitting the wall. The supervisor handed me a camera and pointed at the bag, making a photo gesture with his hands, so I started taking pictures of each ruined item, my hands still shaking as I tried to focus the lens. The woman brought my clothes, but they were wet from being on the floor, and she found a coat somewhere, helping me put it on over my underwear since my shirt was soaked through. The supervisor walked me out of the small room, through a hallway where other officers stared, into the main airport area where normal people were walking with their luggage. He left me at a row of plastic seats and walked away fast, leaving me sitting there in just underwear and a borrowed coat that smelled like cigarettes, people staring as they walked by. My wallet was gone, my phone was destroyed, I had no money, and no way to call anyone, just sitting there holding a plastic bag of broken things. A woman with kind eyes sat down next to me and asked in English if I was okay, and when I started to explain, she handed me her phone without questions. I found the award ceremony organizer's email that I'd memorized and started typing with shaking fingers, attaching the photos I'd taken, trying to explain in simple English what happened. "They hurt me at border," I wrote. "I have no clothes or money, please help," feeling ashamed at how pathetic I sounded but not knowing how else to say it. The organizer called back on the woman's phone within minutes, her voice shocked and saying a car would come get me right away, that the hotel was already paid for, that everything would be handled. The driver found me still sitting in the airport an hour later, helped me into the car without asking questions about why I was dressed like that, and drove me straight to a fancy hotel downtown. The woman at the front desk had been warned I was coming and handed me a room key without asking for documents, just pointed to the elevator and said the room number slowly. In the shower, I finally let myself cry, counting each bruise on my ribs from being pushed against the wall, the cuts on my wrists from the handcuffs, my scalp burning where she'd yanked my hair while cutting it. The hot water stung every place they'd hurt me, but I stayed under it until my skin turned red, trying to wash away the feeling of their hands on me, the dog's breath in my face, the cold water they'd sprayed. I kept checking the locks on the door, jumping at every sound in the hallway, unable to eat the room service the hotel sent up because my stomach was in knots. The whole night I stayed awake practicing what I would say at tomorrow's ceremony if anyone asked about my appearance, writing out simple sentences in English and memorizing them. I typed messages to my family back home, then deleted them, typed again, deleted again, not knowing how to explain that I was safe now, but hadn't been safe before. My wrist throbbed where she'd bent it backward, and in the mirror I could see the mess they'd made of my hair, chunks missing and uneven lengths that no styling could hide. The next morning they sent a car to take me to the ceremony venue, and someone from the organization met me with a borrowed suit that was too big in the shoulders and too short in the legs. Under the bright stage lights I stood there while important people gave speeches I couldn't follow, my legs shaking in the too short pants, trying to smile when the cameras pointed at me. When they called my name for the Peace Prize, I walked up slowly, took the award with my bruised hands, leaned into the microphone and just said, "Thank you," in English before stepping back. Hundreds of people clapped while I stood there holding an award for promoting human dignity, and not one of them could see the bruises under my borrowed suit or knew what their own government's officers had done to me the day before. After the ceremony ended, the organizer grabbed my elbow and steered me toward a side room away from the cameras. "Are you okay?" I pulled out my smashed phone to show her the pieces and lifted my sleeve where purple bruises wrapped around my wrist. She glanced at them quickly, then looked away, her smile getting tighter as she promised she'd look into it. But I could see her checking her watch and thinking about sponsors seeing negative press, about donations drying up if word got out. That night back at the hotel, I couldn't sleep and ended up in the stairwell at 3 in the morning, my chest so tight I thought I was dying. I dumped out the plastic bag with my broken prayer beads and started restringing them one by one, counting each bead as I tried to slow my breathing. The familiar rhythm helped, but my hands kept shaking, and I knew something deep inside me had cracked. I stayed up the rest of the night at the desk in my room, writing down everything that happened in order with exact times and details. 8:15. They took my passport. 8:20. The male officer called me terrorist. 8:30. They pulled me into the small room. I uploaded every photo I'd taken of my injuries and destroyed belongings to 3 different cloud services, terrified the evidence would disappear if I only kept it in one place. The next morning, I typed out a formal email to the event organizers using the simplest English I could manage. Just facts and times and photo reference numbers. No emotion, no accusations. Just beat number 1:815 passport taken, photo reference, a -3. I sent copies to myself at 2 other email addresses. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from someone named Sushma Rubin, saying she was a human rights attorney who'd heard about my situation and wanted to offer free representation. More importantly, she said she could provide a professional interpreter, so I could finally explain everything properly in my own language. I called her immediately, and when I heard her interpreter speaking my language perfectly, asking me to describe what happened, I started crying with relief. She scheduled a medical appointment for that same day, and even though it was humiliating to strip down again and show a stranger every cut and bruise, the clinician was professional and thorough. She photographed my sprained wrist from 3 angles, documented each mark on my ribs, measured the cuts from the handcuffs. Everything went into an official medical record with case numbers and timestamps that couldn't be destroyed or dismissed later. The next day, Sushma filed our administrative complaint with the border agency, and within hours they assigned us an incident number. She explained this meant they had to investigate now, they couldn't ignore it or pretend it didn't happen. Having that case number felt like the first small victory in making this real and undeniable. Then Lawrence Murray from State Department called my hotel room, his voice smooth and careful as he apologized for what he called an unfortunate breakdown in protocol. Breakdown in protocol, like they'd forgotten to offer me coffee instead of torturing me for 8 hours. He kept using these soft words like miscommunication and regrettable incident while pushing for a quiet resolution that wouldn't embarrass anyone. I stayed polite and took notes on everything he said, writing down his exact words about finding a mutually beneficial solution. That evening, a journalist named Gustav Siegel sent me a message through the hotel asking for an off-the-record conversation about my experience. I was suspicious because I'd already seen how people wanted to use my story for their own purposes, but I was also curious if media attention might force real accountability instead of these phone calls about quiet resolutions. When I called Sushma about it, she told me to document absolutely everything first before considering any press interviews. She helped me understand that once the story went public, I'd lose control of how it got told. She set clear boundaries about what I should and shouldn't say if I decided to talk to him, reminding me that everything I said could end up published even if he promised otherwise. Her steady guidance through all these decisions made me feel less alone in trying to navigate this mess of lawyers and officials and reporters, all wanting something from me. The next morning, Monica Callahan from Internal Affairs sent me an email about scheduling an interview and attached this long notice about keeping everything confidential during their investigation. I forwarded it straight to Sushma, who called me back in 10 minutes, explaining exactly what I should say and what I shouldn't mention yet since the investigation was just starting. She told me to stick to facts and avoid opinions about why they did what they did. That evening, I sat at the hotel desk with my laptop creating this huge timeline document with every receipt I had, every timestamp from my travel documents, and all the photos I'd taken of my injuries and destroyed stuff. I uploaded everything to a shared folder for Sushma, organizing each file by date and time and adding notes about what each photo showed. Putting all the evidence together in one place made me feel like I had some control again, like I could prove what happened with actual facts instead of just my word against theirs. The next day, the award organizer called my room and started talking really fast about how we needed to focus on the positive parts of why I got the award in the first place. She kept saying things about sponsors and future events, and I could hear this fear in her voice, like she was worried about losing funding if my situation got too much attention. She saw me as a problem now, not the person they'd wanted to honor just days ago. Sushma filed something called a preservation letter that same afternoon, demanding the airport keep all their security camera footage and any records about what happened to me. She explained that now they couldn't delete anything or claim the footage got recorded over, which meant somewhere there was actual video of those officers doing what they did to me. Knowing that evidence existed made me believe for the first time that they wouldn't be able to just deny everything and make it go away. 2 days later, I met Gustav at a coffee shop near my hotel and made sure he understood the whole context before he wrote anything. I explained about the language barrier and how I couldn't understand most of what they were saying to me, about them destroying my prayer beads and throwing my UN medal in the trash, about the whole 8 hours of making me feel less than human. He listened without interrupting and asked careful questions about the cultural stuff, like why the prayer beads mattered so much and what the medal meant to me personally. The next morning, Gustav sent me his draft questions, and I spent hours going through them, correcting all these assumptions he'd made about where I was from and my background. He'd written stuff that wasn't quite right about my culture and religion, and I fixed each part, explaining why certain details mattered. Being able to shape how he'd tell my story felt like taking back some power over what happened to me. 3 days after that, the Internal Affairs interview finally happened at some government building downtown. Sushma had arranged for a certified interpreter to be there so I could explain every single detail in my own language and know it was translated right. I sat in that cold room for 4 hours going through everything step by step, from the moment the first officer looked at my passport to when they finally let me go. Having someone translate my exact words instead of me struggling with broken English kept me steady, even though I was basically reliving the worst day of my life. That night back at the hotel, I read through the official complaint timeline Sushma had prepared based on my interview. Everything was written so formally with exact times and clinical descriptions of what happened, like officer conducted unauthorized body cavity search at approximately 1:47 p.m. instead of how it actually felt. Seeing it all typed up like that with case numbers and legal language made it feel more real somehow, like it wasn't just some nightmare I'd had, but an actual thing that happened and got documented. The next day, the agency spokesperson put out this statement about how they were reviewing their standard procedures to ensure proper treatment of all travelers. They didn't mention me or what happened specifically, just this generic corporate response about commitment to excellence and continuous improvement. Reading their empty words made me feel invisible again, like what happened to me didn't even deserve to be acknowledged as real. Then everything got worse when blurry photos leaked online showing me in handcuffs at the airport. Someone had taken them with their phone from far away, but you could still see me sitting there half naked and wet. The comments section turned into this huge fight with some people saying I must have done something to deserve it, and others defending me. Reading strangers calling me a terrorist and saying worse things made me pack up and move to a different hotel that afternoon. I registered under a friend's name who was helping me back home, paranoid that someone might try to find me after seeing all the hate online. The hotel staff at the new place didn't know who I was, and that felt safer even though I had to explain to Sushma why my address changed. She understood right away and said she'd seen this happen before when cases got public attention, that sometimes the victim becomes a target all over again. The award organizer called me that morning and started talking about my remaining speech events scheduled for the week. She kept saying how tired I looked and maybe I should focus on recovery instead of doing more public appearances. I could hear something weird in her voice, like she was trying to sound caring, but was actually relieved when I agreed to cancel. She mentioned the sponsors were asking questions about the airport incident and wanted to avoid any controversy that might affect future funding. That stung because I realized she cared more about keeping donors happy than what happened to me. Lawrence called an hour later, and his voice had that fake calm tone government people use when they want you to stop making trouble. He kept saying we should be patient and let the process work, and mentioned how quiet fixes were possible if the media attention stayed manageable. He talked about how these situations could get complicated when the press got involved and suggested maybe I should avoid interviews for now. The way he focused on containing the story instead of getting justice made me trust him even less than I already did. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, and when I checked them, I saw hundreds of messages calling me a liar and fraud. People were sending me threats and saying I made everything up for attention and money. Some messages had my photo from the leaked airport pictures with horrible things written on them. I blocked numbers, but new ones kept coming, and I realized someone had posted my contact info online. I packed my stuff again and moved to another hotel that same afternoon using cash this time. I started taking different routes to meetings and avoided patterns in my daily routine because I didn't feel safe anymore. Sushma called with good news that she'd filed a court petition to force the agency to release all their evidence, including the security footage. The judge had agreed to hear our case next week, which meant we'd finally have legal oversight of what was happening. Having a court date felt like real progress after weeks of the agency stalling and making excuses about their internal review process. Monica sent me an encrypted email saying multiple airport staff had come forward to corroborate what happened. They confirmed hearing the officers using mocking language and saw them using excessive force during my detention. She warned me the officers' union was already preparing their defense and would probably claim I was resisting or not following commands. Knowing other people witnessed it made me feel vindicated, but I also knew the fight was going to get uglier now. Gustav's article went live that afternoon with the headline about diplomatic failures and language barriers at border control. He'd used my quotes carefully and included context about how the invitation got destroyed before anyone could read it. The comments section turned into a huge fight with people arguing about immigration and security and whether I deserved sympathy. At least my side of the story was public now, even if half the people reading it thought I was lying. 3 different TV stations called asking for interviews, but I turned them all down because I didn't want to become entertainment. Instead, I wrote a short statement about what happened and sent it to all of them to use if they wanted. Setting boundaries about how my story got told felt like protecting the little privacy I had left. I had my first appointment with Ling Newton, who Sushma had recommended for trauma counseling. I sat in her office trying to explain what happened without going into the worst details yet. She didn't push me to say more than I was ready for, and we mostly talked about coping strategies. Building trust with her felt hard and fragile, but I knew I needed help processing everything. Monica called that evening to tell me both officers had been placed on paid administrative leave while the investigation continued. Part of me felt relief they couldn't hurt anyone else right now, but it made me mad they were still getting paychecks. She said this was standard procedure, but understood why it felt unfair after what they did to me. The agency's legal team reached out to Sushma with a settlement offer that included covering my medical costs and replacing my destroyed property. The problem was, it came with a huge non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever talking about what happened. Sushma warned me that signing it would mean giving up my right to speak publicly or pursue further legal action. She said these NDAs were common, but we should think carefully before agreeing to silence ourselves forever. The offer was for more money than I'd ever seen, but it felt like they were trying to buy my silence. I spent that night reading through the proposed agreement and all the things I wouldn't be allowed to say if I signed. They wanted me to agree that the incident was a misunderstanding and that no malicious intent was involved. Reading their lawyer language trying to erase what really happened made me angry all over again. Sushma said we could counter their offer and negotiate better terms, but it would take time and patience. She thought we had leverage because of the media attention and the corroborating witnesses Monica had found. The important thing was not to rush into anything just because I was tired and wanted this to be over. The next morning, my phone started buzzing with messages from reporters back home who'd found the story online and wanted interviews about how this country treats foreigners. I scrolled through their requests, seeing how they'd already twisted what happened into headlines about diplomatic failures and national shame. One reporter had written a whole article without even talking to me, using my photo from the award ceremony where I looked beat up and calling it proof of systematic abuse. I deleted their messages and blocked their numbers because I wasn't going to let them use my pain for their political games. Lawrence emailed me a draft apology letter from the agency that made me laugh out loud at how bad it was. The whole thing was written in passive voice, saying things like, "Regrettable incidents occurred, and miscommunications were experienced," without ever saying what they actually did to me. I printed it out and marked it up with a red pen, crossing out their weak language and writing what really happened in the margins. I scanned my marked up version and sent it back to Lawrence with a note that said they needed to admit they tortured me for 8 hours, not pretend it was some misunderstanding. That afternoon, I sat at my hotel desk and started writing my own statement about what happened and what it meant for other people who might face the same treatment. My hands moved across the keyboard as I described how language barriers turn into weapons when officials choose cruelty over basic human decency. I wrote about the prayer beads scattered on the floor and how destroying someone's religious items isn't just property damage, but an attack on their identity. The writing helped me organize my thoughts about what justice would actually look like beyond just money and apologies. 3 days later, we all met for mediation at a conference room downtown where their lawyers pushed a settlement agreement across the table at me. Sushma read through it quickly and shook her head, pointing out the non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever talking about what happened again. I pushed the papers back and told them through the interpreter that I wanted therapy coverage for at least 2 years and concrete policy changes for language access at all ports of entry. Their lead lawyer started talking about how that wasn't standard, but I cut him off and said nothing about what they did to me was standard either. Monica called me that evening to let me know the internal policy review would happen no matter what we agreed to in the settlement. She couldn't promise major changes, but said at least the investigation would document everything and create a paper trail for future incidents. It wasn't enough to fix the system, but knowing there would be some official record of their failures felt like a small victory. We went back and forth for another week before reaching terms that included full medical costs, replacement of all my destroyed items, a limited NDA that still let me speak generally about the incident, and a donation to a legal aid fund for immigrants. The relief of having it settled mixed with sadness about everything that couldn't be fixed with money or promises. The public apology happened at a small press event where I read my prepared statement while an agency representative stood at another podium reading their carefully worded admission of procedural failures. No names were mentioned, and they never used the word torture, but having them admit on camera that they failed to follow their own policies mattered for anyone else who might face similar treatment. A week later, the award organizers held a small lunch for humanitarian recipients where they asked if I wanted to speak about my work. I talked for just a few minutes about the importance of language access and treating all travelers with basic dignity, regardless of where they come from. Afterward, 3 other recipients came up to me privately and shared their own stories of being mistreated at borders because of their nationality or appearance. 2 weeks had passed when I finally had to go back through the airport to fly home. Walking past the security checkpoint, I saw officers in the same uniforms as the ones who hurt me, but I kept my pace steady and my breathing normal. My hands stayed calm in my pockets, and I realized the shaking fear that had lived in my body since that first day was starting to fade. At the departure gate, they offered me a VIP escort to skip the regular security line, but I said no thanks and went through the normal process with everyone else. I had all my documents ready, answered their questions clearly through an interpreter they now had to provide, and walked through the metal detector without any drama. Choosing to go through the regular way on my own terms instead of accepting special treatment felt like taking back some control over how I moved through their space. The flight home took 14 hours, and I slept through most of it, waking only when the attendant brought meals. My apartment smelled musty when I unlocked the door and dropped my bags in the hallway. The humanitarian project files sat on my desk exactly where I'd left them 3 weeks earlier. I opened my laptop and started answering the backlog of emails from colleagues asking where I'd been. Each response took longer than usual because my hands would start shaking after typing for more than 10 minutes. I managed 3 hours of work that first day before exhaustion forced me to stop. The next morning I tried attending our regular team video call, but had to turn off my camera when questions about my appearance started. Over the following days, I built back to half my normal workload, taking breaks every hour to walk around the apartment. Gustav sent me a draft of his follow-up article 2 weeks later, documenting how the border agency had quietly updated their training materials. He'd gotten copies of internal memos showing they'd added a whole section on language barriers after my case. The online comments under his article shifted from calling me a liar to debating whether the changes went far enough. Monica's email arrived that same afternoon with the investigation results attached as a PDF. Both officers got 6-month suspensions without pay, pending completion of sensitivity training. The union had already filed appeals, but Monica wrote that video evidence made their case weak. She'd pushed for termination, but the review board settled on documented reprimands in their permanent files. Lawrence called the next morning to confirm the State Department had issued new verification protocols to all entry points. Any traveler with government invitations would now trigger automatic supervisor review before detention. He read me excerpts from the policy memo that specifically mentioned language interpretation requirements. The changes would take months to fully implement, but at least they were in writing now. Sushma sent the final settlement paperwork by courier that afternoon with sticky notes marking where to sign. Part of the money would go directly to an immigrant legal aid fund we'd selected together. She included contact information for 3 therapists who specialized in trauma from authority figures. My insurance would cover weekly sessions for at least a year based on the documented injuries. I spent that evening at my kitchen table with tweezers and new string, carefully threading each prayer bead back in order. The UN medal's backing had cracked when the officer threw it, but I found replacement parts online. Using tiny pliers and superglue, I rebuilt the clasp and polished the metal until it looked almost new. The photos from that day stayed in an encrypted folder on my laptop, backed up to 3 different cloud services. Looking at them didn't make me panic anymore, but I kept them as evidence of what survival actually looked like. I typed up my account of what happened and posted it to a forum for humanitarian workers with clear boundaries stated up front. No private messages, no interview requests, no debates about whether I deserved it. When the comments started arguing about immigration policy, I closed the browser and didn't check again for a week. 3 months had passed since that day at the border when I realized I could work a full day without my hands shaking. The nightmares came less often, and I'd found a therapist who helped me process the trauma without making me relive every detail. I wasn't the same person who'd arrived excited for that award ceremony, but I'd kept my dignity through everything they did to me, and now I was helping other travelers understand their rights at borders. The settlement money funded legal help for 12 people facing similar situations. My story had changed some policies that might protect others from what I experienced. That mattered more than being completely healed. Well, folks, that was definitely a journey. Appreciate you being here and wondering through it all with me. Until we meet again, take care. Like the video, it helps more than you think.